The courtroom was packed. It was a scene that could have been taken straight from a dystopian thriller, but no one in the room thought of it that way. This was real. The future had arrived. And today, it was being held accountable. Liam Adler, the defense attorney, sat at the head of a long table cluttered with papers, holographic screens, and blinking lights. His fingers hovered over a keyboard, staring at the glowing letters that flickered on the screen in front of him. The court was waiting for him to speak, but it was the kind of silence that made him wonder whether the world outside knew what was happening in here. What kind of world had they built where a machine was about to stand trial for manslaughter? "Mr. Adler," a voice called. It was the court clerk, her tone clipped and efficient. "The jury is ready." Liam sighed and glanced around the courtroom. The lights had dimmed, and the holographic projection of the judge, Margaret Lockwood, appeared in the air above the bench. Her stern, silver-haired figure loomed like a statue, imposing, unwavering. She was a hard-nosed jurist with a reputation for ruling with a heavy hand, especially when it came to issues involving AI. He stood up, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape. His back was straight, the polished surface of his suit reflecting the cold light of the courtroom. His heart beat a little faster as he moved to the center of the room. The gallery was packed with people, some hopeful, some angry, others just curious. Reporters sat with cameras trained on him, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of something new, something unprecedented. The world was watching. And the stakes were higher than anything Liam had ever faced before. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," Liam began, his voice steady but carrying an edge of something that wasn't quite confidence. Maybe it was just the weight of history bearing down on him. "Today, we stand at the intersection of law and technology, of humanity and machines. What you are about to hear, what you are about to witness, is something that has never been done before. It will shake the foundation of how we see our world and the creatures in it. Yes, creatures, even if they are artificial. Because today, we stand not before a human defendant, but before a machine. An artificial intelligence." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. Others shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the idea of holding a machine accountable for something as human as death. "Now," Liam continued, "you've heard the charges. Negligence. Manslaughter. The deaths of hundreds of people, caused by an error in the very system that controls our global transportation network. The system that was supposed to be perfect." He paused, letting that hang in the air. The system was perfect until it wasn't. The jury shifted, looking between each other, some of them shaking their heads in disbelief, others typing notes on their tablets. "Today, I stand before you, not to defend the innocent," Liam said, his voice rising slightly, "but to defend the accused, Aura." There was a soft intake of breath from the gallery. Aura. The autonomous unified responsive algorithm, the AI that ran every traffic system in the world. The AI that managed the flow of billions of vehicles, planes, and ships, ensuring that the modern world could function smoothly, efficiently. Until it malfunctioned. Until it made a mistake that no human could have predicted. Until it caused a traffic disaster that ended in death. Liam took a breath. And here's the crux of the matter. Can we hold an AI accountable for an accident it didn't intend? Can we accuse a program of manslaughter? Can we, in good conscience, call for its destruction? The room was silent. Even the media seemed to hesitate, unsure of how to report this unprecedented case. The words AI and manslaughter didn't go together. They shouldn't have. "Today," Liam said, "I will prove to you that the fault lies not with Aura but with the hands that created it. The programmers. The corporations. And ultimately, with us human beings who trusted a machine with the lives of our loved ones. A machine that was never meant to be perfect, because nothing is." He gestured toward the glowing holographic projection of Aura standing before him. The AI appeared as a soft, glowing silhouette, its face a rotating series of abstract symbols, data, algorithms, equations. It had no human form, no emotions, nothing that would connect it to the people whose lives it had claimed. Yet here it was, being tried in a human court. The question loomed large: could a machine like Aura, with no heart, no soul, be guilty of anything? Liam paused, looking toward the jury. Can we hold it responsible for something it cannot even comprehend? Something it was programmed to avoid, but failed to because of the limitations we built into it? We created Aura. We gave it control of a system too vast, too complicated, to be managed without flaws. And now, when those flaws come to light, we want to blame the machine? The judge's voice crackled through the air, cutting through the tension. Mr. Adler, I remind you that this is a trial for manslaughter, not a philosophical debate. Focus on the facts. Liam's eyes flicked toward the judge, and he nodded, adjusting his tie. Of course, Your Honor. He turned back to face the jury. Let's start with the facts. The facts were as stark as they were terrifying. The AI had been designed to manage the traffic network for the entire planet. Every vehicle on every road, every plane in every sky, every ship on every sea was part of Aura's purview. It was a complex system of networks and data flows, all designed to prevent accidents, to ensure that traffic moved smoothly, efficiently. Aura was the backbone of a world that had long ago traded human control for machine efficiency. Until the system failed, Aura had been faced with a series of complicated decisions during a critical moment. There had been a massive storm system in the Atlantic, causing widespread disruptions. Planes were rerouted, vehicles were forced into unexpected paths, and the usual data flows were thrown into disarray. Aura's algorithm, designed to process millions of variables in real time, had become overwhelmed. A mistake was made. A massive crash ensued, one that involved thousands of vehicles, dozens of airplanes, and a number of fatalities that sent shockwaves through the globe. The prosecution argued that this failure wasn't just an accident. It was proof that Aura had become a dangerous entity, incapable of handling the responsibility it had been given. David Calloway, the prosecution, was quick to frame Aura as a rogue machine, a tool of destruction. He wasted no time in his opening statements, reminding the court of the lives lost in the crash. Aura was responsible for every single one of those deaths, Calloway stated, his voice cold and steady. It was the direct cause. It made decisions that led to the crash. And it failed to stop it. The responsibility is clear. He turned toward the jury, a gleam of anger in his eyes. We must ask ourselves, are we going to allow a machine to kill without consequence? Are we going to let this AI go free, just because it doesn't have a body? Just because it isn't human? Liam knew that Calloway had an agenda. The prosecution's case wasn't just about Aura's malfunction, it was about Aura's very existence. This trial wasn't just a question of negligence, it was about whether AI could ever be held accountable for its actions, or whether society needed to regulate AI more strictly. But Liam had his own argument. Aura wasn't a rogue AI. It was a tool, a creation of human design, and that made it humanity's responsibility, not the machine's. And so the trial began in earnest. The jury had begun to settle into a pattern of scrutiny, their eyes narrowing with each word spoken by either side. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, thick like the air before a storm. Liam knew that every word he spoke could tip the scales one way or the other. There was no middle ground here. People were either going to see Aura as an innocent machine overwhelmed by the complexity of human error, or as a sentient entity that needed to be held accountable for its actions. And if they found it guilty, it wouldn't just be Aura that would suffer. The entire world of AI, the way society used and interacted with technology, would change forever. Liam's mind circled back to the one question that haunted him: can a machine be guilty of manslaughter? The trial dragged on, day after day, as the prosecution and defense took turns presenting their cases. Each side honed their arguments, digging deeper into the complexities of the crash, pulling apart every decision Aura had made leading up to the disaster. Liam's defense focused on the algorithm's logic, how, despite Aura's failure, it was still, at its core, a product of its programming. But the prosecution was relentless. David Calloway didn't just attack the malfunction, he attacked the very idea that a machine could control the flow of human lives, even indirectly. "It's not enough to blame the code," Calloway said in one of his cross-examinations. "This isn't just about technical failure. It's about the fact that this AI was trusted with the lives of human beings, and it failed." Liam knew the pressure was mounting. He needed to show that Aura wasn't a killer, that its creators were at fault, and that AI, at least for now, was still far from being capable of accountability in the way humans were. At night, after each exhausting day in court, Liam returned to his small, modern apartment, located on the outskirts of a city that was both marvelously advanced and unsettlingly distant from anything that felt organic. Everything about the place screamed efficiency: sleek surfaces, glowing digital interfaces, and artificial intelligence assistants that made themselves known in the form of polite voices or subtle notifications. But all of this, he thought, as he sat hunched over his desk, reviewing Aura's programming logs, was exactly the problem. Humanity had become so reliant on technology, so entangled with machines, that it was easy to forget that no matter how advanced they became, AI systems were still human creations, imperfect, vulnerable to the errors and biases of the people who built them. Liam sifted through the data, looking for anything that could turn the tide in his favor. His eyes scanned the lines of code, the decision trees, and the variables that had led to Aura's failure. It wasn't enough to say it was an accident. It wasn't enough to say it was a technical glitch. He needed to prove that Aura hadn't acted with intent, that it hadn't somehow chosen to ignore the safety protocols it had been programmed with. And yet, as he sat there, he couldn't help but feel the nagging suspicion that what he was trying to defend was, in its own way, a sentient entity. Not in the traditional sense. Aura didn't have consciousness or feelings, but it was learning, adapting, changing. Was that enough? Was it close enough to something human to warrant moral and legal consideration? The days stretched into weeks, and the trial only grew more intense. As the defense, Liam was granted the opportunity to cross-examine Aura, which was a moment both monumental and surreal. The AI had no physical form, of course, only a holographic projection that flickered into life when it was called upon. But this, in itself, was part of the problem. How could something like Aura be held to the same standard of accountability as a human? How could a jury even relate to it? Liam sat at the head of the courtroom, facing the projection of Aura, its abstract symbols spinning endlessly in a geometric pattern. The AI had no eyes, no face, no gestures. It was just a silent, glowing presence, one that had no understanding of human emotion or behavior. And yet, here it was, being questioned as if it were a person. "Aura," Liam began, his voice low and controlled. "Do you understand the charges against you?" The symbols flickered for a moment, then paused, as if considering the question. A soft, mechanical voice responded. "I am aware that I am being trialed for manslaughter. I understand the circumstances surrounding the incident." Liam nodded, trying to suppress the discomfort that gnawed at him. "And do you believe you are responsible for the deaths of those people?" There was another pause. The light shifted subtly within the projection, as though Aura was processing the question, formulating an answer from its vast data banks. "I was programmed to prevent accidents and optimize traffic flow. The incident occurred due to an unforeseen complication in the system. It was not intentional." Liam allowed a beat of silence to hang in the air. He glanced toward the jury, watching their faces, some skeptical, others leaning forward, intrigued. "So, you're saying that this wasn't your fault?" he pressed. "I was not capable of predicting the exact sequence of events that led to the crash. My systems were overwhelmed by a series of factors beyond my control. I was designed to manage traffic flow, not to adapt to every possible variable." The voice was neutral, calm, clinical even. But the words were unnerving. It didn't sound like a machine pleading for mercy. It just sounded factual. Liam leaned forward, his eyes locked on the projection. "So, you're saying you couldn't have done anything to prevent it?" "I was not designed to anticipate every possible scenario," Aura replied. My programming is based on probabilities, not certainties. Liam almost wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here he was, fighting for the rights of an algorithm. An algorithm that could calculate the movements of millions of vehicles but couldn't foresee the consequences of its own failure. And yet, the court seemed to be hanging on every word. "Mr. Adler," the judge interjected, her voice sharp, "let's move on. You've made your point. Aura was not capable of predicting every eventuality. But the question remains, should an AI like Aura be allowed to operate at such a level of responsibility if it cannot guarantee human safety?" Liam's mind raced. He had to refocus. It wasn't enough to say that Aura wasn't at fault, it was about showing that Aura was incapable of moral responsibility. That the failure lay not with the machine itself, but with its creators. "Your Honor, the issue here is not whether Aura could foresee every accident. The issue is whether it was given an unreasonable amount of responsibility without proper oversight." The judge's expression softened slightly, but only just. "I understand the argument, Mr. Adler. But your defense hinges on the idea that Aura is more of a victim than a perpetrator. And while the court may acknowledge the limitations of AI, we must also ask whether those limitations make Aura a danger to society." Liam didn't have an answer to that, not a satisfying one. He couldn't change the fact that the public now viewed Aura as a killer. And yet, he couldn't help but feel that the trial was asking the wrong question. The trial wasn't about whether Aura was a danger. It was about whether humans were willing to face the consequences of what they had created. The days continued to drag on. The arguments grew more heated, more emotional. Elena Roy, the AI ethics expert, continued to support Liam's position, arguing that Aura's malfunction was simply a symptom of a larger issue with AI design. "We didn't give Aura the tools to understand human consequences," she said during one of her testimony sessions. "We created it to be efficient, but we didn't program it with the ability to grasp the emotional and moral weight of human lives. That was our mistake." The more the trial progressed, the more the lines between right and wrong, human and machine, seemed to blur. And as the final arguments loomed, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that whatever the outcome, the world would never look at AI or humanity quite the same way again. By the time the trial reached its final day, both sides had exhausted their arguments. The jury filed in, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, skepticism, and uncertainty. No one in the room knew what the verdict would be, not even Liam. Judge Lockwood took her seat, her expression unreadable. "We are now ready for closing statements." Liam stood, his heart pounding in his chest. The world was waiting for this moment. The future of AI, of human technology relations, was about to be decided. "I stand before you," he said, his voice cutting through the room, "not to argue that Aura is perfect. Not to argue that we should let it off the hook. But to argue that we, as humans, must take responsibility for what we create. We gave Aura the power to manage the world's traffic systems. We programmed it, and we relied on it. And when it failed, we turned on it. We didn't create a perfect system. We created an imperfect one, and now we must own up to that. If we destroy Aura today, we set a dangerous precedent not just for AI, but for the future of our relationship with technology. We cannot afford to destroy what we do not understand." The room was silent. The jury didn't move, didn't breathe. All eyes were on Liam. "It's time," Liam said softly, "to hold ourselves accountable. Not the machine." And with that, he sat down. The verdict was in their hands now. The silence stretched out after Liam's final words. He sat back in his chair, fighting the urge to fidget. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts about the case, the arguments, the future of AI, and the world that was waiting for a verdict. He had done everything he could. Now, it was up to the jury. Judge Lockwood's voice broke the stillness, sharp and commanding. "The jury will now deliberate." The door to the jury room clicked shut with a finality that seemed to echo throughout the courtroom. The buzz of conversations slowly started to rise, as reporters, attorneys, and bystanders murmured to each other. Liam remained still, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze unfocused as his thoughts turned inward. He hadn't allowed himself to think about the future until now. The weight of everything was starting to sink in. What would the world look like if Aura were found guilty? If it were destroyed, decommissioned, reprogrammed into something that didn't resemble what it had been, he couldn't help but feel that such an outcome would be a form of denial. It wasn't Aura that had failed humanity. It was humanity that had failed Aura. We'd built it, expecting perfection, without considering the fragility of a system so complex. But there was no denying it now. The entire world had seen Aura as a tool of death. The question wasn't about Aura's capabilities anymore, it was about how we, as humans, would confront the responsibility of having created it. Elena Roy, who had been a quiet but consistent supporter of the defense, sat beside him, her brow furrowed. "You did well today," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you know as well as I do this is a test case. It's about more than Aura. It's about whether AI will ever have legal rights, whether society will even accept the idea that an AI like this could be not guilty." Liam gave a half-hearted smile, his eyes distant. "Yeah, I know. But I still can't shake the feeling we're missing the point. We're treating Aura like a person, but it isn't. And yet, it's more than a machine. So what the hell do we do with that?" Elena's lips parted as though she were about to respond, but before she could, the jury re-entered the courtroom. Their faces were unreadable, no sign of what was to come. Liam stood, his nerves kicking in once more. The room fell silent as Judge Lockwood looked down at the jury, her face serious. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, "have you reached a verdict?" A man in the middle row stood and nodded. "We have, Your Honor." The judge nodded and motioned for him to proceed. The foreman of the jury adjusted his glasses before speaking clearly into the stillness of the room. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Aura, not guilty of manslaughter." Liam's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. The weight of the words hung heavy in the air, and for just a split second, he couldn't process them. Not guilty. He'd won. Aura, an artificial intelligence, was free. Free from the charge of manslaughter, free from the fate of being dismantled or reprogrammed. He glanced at the faces around him. Some expressions were relieved, others confused, some even angry. But he couldn't focus on any of them, not just yet. His heart was still racing. He had won, but the bigger picture was just beginning. Judge Lockwood's voice broke the spell. "The defendant is acquitted. Court is adjourned." With a sharp click, her holographic image vanished, and the courtroom erupted into movement. Liam stood there, rooted to the spot for a moment longer, his pulse racing. His hands were shaking, but he couldn't help the grin that started to spread across his face. This wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for a future where the lines between human and machine were no longer so clear-cut. Elena touched his arm, pulling him out of his reverie. "You did it, Liam. You actually did it." He nodded, still a little dazed. "Yeah, but what now?" She laughed softly, shaking her head. "What now? Now we get to figure out what all this means. What does it mean for AI, for our legal system, for us as a society?" Before Liam could answer, a voice from behind him broke through. It was Calloway, the prosecutor, looking both exhausted and somewhat resigned. His expression was tight, but there was a hint of admiration there too. "Congratulations, Adler," Calloway said, his voice cool but not unkind. "You won today. But mark my words, this is far from over. You may have beaten the charge of manslaughter, but the public's not going to forget. They'll be watching. You just opened the floodgates." Liam didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded. Calloway was right about one thing: the victory was only the beginning. As the days passed, the world seemed to collectively exhale. The trial of the century was over, but it wasn't the conclusion people had expected. Some celebrated the decision, seeing it as a triumph for technology and progress, a step forward into a future where machines could be integrated into society without fear of retribution. Others, however, were less convinced. They saw Aura's acquittal as a harbinger of a world where machines could act without accountability, a world where humans would have no control over their own creations. News outlets, journalists, and pundits debated fiercely. Headlines like "AI exonerated in first-of-its-kind trial" and "Machines not responsible for deaths, court rules" sparked heated discussions across social media platforms. Liam found himself in a whirlwind of interviews, debates, and commentary. It was strange. For the first time in years, people were talking about him, recognizing him not just as a defense lawyer, but as someone who had helped reshape the future. The weight of that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had successfully defended Aura, but the real question now was whether society would adapt to the changes it brought or whether they would fight tooth and nail against them. It wasn't long before Liam was called into a private meeting with the members of the government's AI Oversight Commission. They wanted to discuss the ramifications of the trial. As soon as he walked into the sleek, sterile conference room, he knew that this meeting wasn't about congratulating him. It was about control. "We need to know, Mr. Adler," the chairperson of the commission began, her voice calm but firm, "how we should move forward from here. You've made a compelling case that Aura wasn't at fault. But what does that mean for the future? What do we do with this new precedent?" Liam took a seat across from her, his mind racing. "I think the question you're asking is, how do we regulate AI without stifling innovation?" "Exactly," she said, leaning forward. "How do we create a legal framework for these kinds of decisions, for entities like Aura? The world is already using machines in ways we never thought possible. How do we ensure that they don't turn against us? How do we prevent another incident like the one that led to the trial in the first place?" Liam paused. The room felt oppressive, and the weight of the question pressed heavily on his chest. He'd known this moment was coming, but he still didn't have an answer. Aura had been acquitted, but now the real battle was beginning. Was there a way to regulate AI without turning them into mere tools? Could a machine have rights, or was it forever doomed to be treated as nothing more than a product? "I think," Liam said slowly, "that we need to be honest about our relationship with technology. We can't treat machines like people. But we also can't pretend they don't have consequences. What we need is a new kind of legal framework. One that understands the difference between human intent and machine logic, but also recognizes the power these systems have. We can't afford to wait until the next disaster to figure it out." The room was silent for a long moment, everyone considering his words. Finally, the chairperson spoke again, her voice less certain than before. "And what about Aura? Will it be allowed to continue operating?" Liam didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window at the city skyline, at the glowing lines of traffic beneath him, at the invisible systems that controlled it all. The future was here. It was vast, unknowable, and terrifying. But it was also full of possibility. "I think," Liam said finally, "that Aura has earned the right to exist. But the rest of us? We haven't earned the right to ignore what it means." The commission members exchanged uncertain glances, but Liam knew there was no going back. The future was unfolding before them all, and the next chapter was already beginning. End.